This 6-year-old girl was tired of being in an abusive situation and decided to take action. Desperate, she goes to a millionaire and asks, "Sir, my sister gets hit every day. Please help me." 2 days later, this rich man takes action that changes everything. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The rain lashed against the windows of the luxurious office on the top floor of the Pinnacle Tower, the most imposing commercial building in Harmony Glens. George Montgomery, 45, adjusted his navy blue tie while watching the drops trickle down the bulletproof glass. The clock read 7:43 p.m., and he was finally finishing signing the last documents of a multi-million-dollar deal. His calloused fingers, reminiscent of the days when he worked construction, now glided over papers worth millions. The intercom buzzed, breaking the silence. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm about to leave for the day. There's a situation down here that needs your attention." The voice of Mrs. Eleanor, the receptionist who had worked with him for 15 years, sounded different than usual. There was concern in her tone. "Send them up, Eleanor," he replied, intrigued by the employee's hesitation. Minutes later, soft knocks on the door caught his attention. Upon opening it, George was met not with Eleanor but with a small girl, completely drenched, shivering from the cold. Her brown eyes, large and frightened, stared at him with a mixture of fear and pleading. "Are you the owner here?" asked a child, her voice barely a whisper. George knelt down to be at her level. "I am. What's your name, little one?" "Lily," she replied, twisting the hem of her wet shirt. "I'm 6 years old." "Lily, where are your parents? How did you get here alone?" The girl swallowed hard, her eyes welling up. "I came secretly. My dad, he hits Daisy every night. She's only 4 years old, mister. I can't stand to see it anymore." George's heart tightened. Memories of his own impoverished childhood in rural Pennsylvania flooded his mind. He remembered when, at 8 years old, he saw his father crying hidden away after losing everything to a loan shark. "Come on, let's get you dried off first," he said, grabbing his own coat from the coat rack. "Where do you live, Lily?" "In the Willow Creek Trailer Park," she replied, letting out a sob, "near the old factory." George knew the area well, one of the poorest neighborhoods in town. As he wrapped the girl in the coat, she continued, "Michelle, my older sister, is 14 years old. She tries to protect us, but today Dad came home really mad. He broke everything in the house." "And your mother?" "Mom left a long time ago. Dad says she—" Lily stopped as if afraid to continue. At that moment, Mrs. Eleanor appeared at the door, breathless. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm so sorry. She ran up here when I went to get coffee." "It's okay, Eleanor," George reassured her. "Please, and call my driver. I'm going to take this little one home and take care of this situation." While they waited, Lily told him more about her family. Her father, Ted Fisher, was a construction worker, but he had lost several jobs because of drinking. Since her mother, Bernice, had left 2 years ago, the situation had only gotten worse. In the car, on the way to Willow Creek, Lily became quieter. When they got close to her home, a simple trailer with peeling paint, she grabbed George's arm. "Please don't tell him it was me. He'll be even angrier." George's heart broke seeing the fear in the girl's eyes. The trailer was dark, except for a dim light coming from the back window. Shouts could be heard from inside. "Stay here in the car with Jorge," George said to the girl, referring to the driver. "I'm going to talk to your father." As he approached, "The trailer!" he heard a teenage voice pleading. "Dad, stop! Daisy has a fever. She needs to rest." George didn't hesitate. He knocked loudly on the door, his imposing presence contrasting with the fragility of the structure. The shouts ceased. Immediately, the door opened, revealing a staggering man, red eyes and unshaven. Behind him, a thin teenager held a small child in her arms, both with terrified expressions. "Who are you?" asked Ted, his slurred voice betraying his drunkenness. George straightened his posture, using his 6'1" height to assert his presence. "Good evening, Mr. Fisher. I'm George Montgomery, and I believe we need to have a serious conversation about your daughters." The man stumbled back, confused by the presence of this well-dressed stranger at his door. Michelle took advantage of the distraction to run to the bedroom with Daisy, who was burning with fever in her arms. That rainy night, none of those present could imagine how their lives would completely change in the next 8 months. What began with the desperate plea of a courageous child would become a story of pain, redemption, and new beginnings, involving secrets from the past and choices that would change everyone's destiny forever. The silence that followed George's arrival was broken by the sound of something breaking inside the trailer. Ted, staggering, tried to close the door, but the businessman was faster. With a firm movement, he prevented it from closing. "You have no right," Ted began, but his voice failed when he saw George's stern expression. "Right? Let's talk about rights, Mr. Fisher. Your daughters have the right to live without fear. Little Daisy has the right not to be burning with fever without medical attention." George kept his voice controlled, but his eyes flashed with indignation. Michelle reappeared in the living room, her wide eyes alternating between her father and the well-dressed stranger. The teenager had purple marks on her arms, but maintained a protective posture, as if ready to defend her sisters at any cost. "Michelle, get some clothes for you and your sisters. You won't spend another night here," ordered George, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "You can't take my daughters." Ted advanced, stumbling over his own feet. "I'll call the police." "Call them. I'll be happy to explain the marks on your teenage daughter's arms and the fever of the little one who isn't receiving care." George took his cell phone out of his pocket. "Or we can resolve this another way. Your choice." At that moment, a weak cry came from the bedroom. It was Daisy. Michelle ran inside, returning with her youngest sister in her arms. The 4-year-old girl was pale, her hair matted to her sweaty forehead. "She needs a hospital," said Michelle, her voice choked with emotion. "Please, mister. She's been like this since yesterday." George approached, touching the little one's forehead. "She's burning up. Michelle, get what you need. Let's go now." Ted, leaning against the wall, seemed to have lost all his previous bravado. His hands were shaking and tears began to run down his unshaven face. I didn't mean to. The drink." "Now is not the time for explanations," George interrupted. "You need help, Mr. Fisher, and your daughters need safety." While Michelle ran to gather some clothes, George called his driver. "Jorge, bring Lily and call another car to follow us to the hospital." Minutes later, the 3 sisters were in the back seat of George's black Mercedes. Lily, still wrapped in his coat, hugged Daisy, who was trembling with fever in Michelle's arms. At the nearest private hospital, little Daisy was immediately treated. The diagnosis revealed a serious infection, aggravated by an old, poorly healed fracture in her right arm. The medical team, led by Dr. Renee Baker, a woman with grey hair and a compassionate look, began emergency treatment. "Mr. Montgomery," called Dr. Baker after stabilizing Daisy, "we need to talk about some disturbing details we found in the tests." In her office, the doctor showed x-rays that revealed a history of old fractures in the girl's body. "These aren't common childhood accidents," she explained, her professional tone masking her indignation. "There's a pattern here that suggests—" "I understand," interrupted George, running his hands over his tired face. "Doctor, what do I need to do legally to protect these girls? I've already contacted Child Protective Services as protocol dictates. But honestly, it would be good to have someone with your resources and influence following the case." While they talked, Michelle cared for her sisters in the private room that George had provided. The teenager, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to relax a little, although her watchful eyes never left the door. In the hospital lobby, an unexpected figure appeared. Dennis Chambers, 50, George's biggest rival in business. The businessman, known for his aggressive business practices, spoke in a low voice with a nurse, pointing to Daisy's admission form. Alice, a 65-year-old veteran nurse, watched the scene with suspicion. She knew Dennis's difficult temperament well. Her late husband had worked for him for years. Discreetly, she warned George about the rival's presence. "What does he want here?" George muttered to himself as he headed to the front desk. But before he could confront Dennis, a new complication arose. Judge Dana Albright, from the local juvenile court, entered the hospital. Tall, elegant, and with a penetrating gaze, she carried a green file under her arm. Upon seeing George, her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice controlled, "what a coincidence to find you here." There was nothing coincidental about that meeting, and they both knew it. Dana was the daughter of Arnold Albright, the man who, decades ago, had brought George's father to ruin with a financial scheme. "Judge Albright," he replied, maintaining his professional tone, "I imagine you're already aware of the situation." "Yes, I received the report from Child Protective Services, and I must say that I have serious concerns about your involvement in this case." Before George could respond, Dennis approached, a calculated smile on his lips. "Judge Albright, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about my cousin, Ted." The revelation hit George like a punch. Ted Fisher was Dennis Chambers' cousin. How did his rival, known for controlling half of the commercial ventures in Harmony Glens, have a relative living in those conditions? In the room, oblivious to the adults' maneuvers, the three sisters remained together. Lily had fallen asleep holding Daisy's hand, while Michelle maintained her silent vigil. The teenager had learned the hard way that moments of peace could be brutally interrupted. And she was right. Soon in the morning, a legal battle would begin, involving secrets buried for decades and revelations that would shake the power structures in Harmony Glens. The fate of the three sisters was about to become the center of a dispute far greater than anyone could imagine. George, watching the girls through the window of the room, made a silent promise. He would not allow them to return to that situation, no matter what it cost. But as he thought about it, he did not notice the significant look exchanged between Dana and Dennis, nor did he notice when Alice, the nurse, made a discreet call to someone who would completely change the course of that story. In the hospital parking lot, inside a dark car, Ted Fisher wept copiously, clutching an old photograph. In the image, a woman smiled holding a baby. On the back, a date and an incomplete message. "Forgive me, but I need to go." The truth about that night. The morning arrived with a fine, persistent rain in Harmony Glens. At the hospital, George had not slept, alternating between the couch in the room where the girls rested and the incessant calls to his lawyer, Quincy Davis. The businessman knew he would need specialized legal help to face what was to come. Quincy arrived at the hospital at 7:30 a.m., carrying a worn leather briefcase and a thermos of coffee. At 47, with prematurely grey hair and old-fashioned glasses, he didn't seem like the kind of lawyer one would expect to see alongside one of the richest men in the region. But his ordinary appearance hid a brilliant mind and a personal history that connected him deeply to the case. "Do you have any idea of the hornet's nest you've stirred up, George?" asked Quincy, after hearing the whole story. "Dana Albright isn't just a common judge. She's built her career prosecuting businessmen who, according to her, abuse their economic power. And coincidentally, she's the daughter of the man who destroyed my father," completed George, his voice laden with bitterness. "But there's more, Quincy. Dennis Chambers showed up here last night. He's the girl's father's cousin." Quincy almost choked on his coffee. "Cousin? That same Dennis who tried to buy your construction company last year? Before they could continue the conversation, they heard raised voices in the hallway. It was Ted, now sober, arguing with the nurse Alice, who was trying to prevent him from entering the girls' room. "They're my daughters. I have the right to see them," he shouted, while Alice, with the authority of her 65 years of life and 40 of profession, stood firm at the door. "You will only enter after the social worker arrives," she replied impassively, "and I suggest you lower your voice. This is a hospital." George and Quincy approached quickly. Ted was different from the night before. He had taken a shower, shaved, and wore clean clothes that seemed too new for his standard of living. "Mr. Montgomery," said Ted, completely changing his tone upon seeing the businessman, "I need to talk to you. There are things you need to know." At that moment, Michelle opened the door of the room, attracted by the commotion. Upon seeing her, "Father?" she instinctively recoiled, placing herself between the door and her sisters, who were still sleeping. "Daughter," began Ted, his voice choked with emotion. "Not now, Dad," interrupted Michelle, with a surprising maturity in her 14 years. "Daisy still has a fever. She needs to rest." The arrival of Melinda Carter, the social worker, interrupted the tense moment. Tall, black, in her 40s, and with an expression that mixed firmness and compassion, she greeted everyone professionally. "Gentlemen, let's resolve this in the meeting room," she said, guiding the group away from the room. "Mrs. Alice, please stay with the girls." In the hospital meeting room, Melinda examined Daisy's medical reports while listening to the different sides of the story. Her experienced gaze wasn't missing any detail, not Ted's trembling hands, nor the way he avoided looking directly at the photos of his daughter's injuries. "Mr. Fisher," she began, "we found a consistent pattern of injuries on your youngest daughter. Can you explain this?" Ted opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the abrupt arrival of Dennis Chambers, accompanied by an aggressively looking lawyer. "My cousin won't answer anything without legal representation," Dennis declared, placing his hand on Ted's shoulder. "Mr. Miller will take care of the case from now on." The lawyer, Adam Miller, known in legal circles as Shark, opened his briefcase and began distributing documents. "As you can see," he said, "Mr. Fisher has already begun treatment for alcoholism at the best clinic in the region, courtesy of Mr. Chambers. We also have a job offer here at Chambers Enterprises, with a salary 3 times higher than what he earned as a freelance construction worker." Quincy examined the documents carefully, his face hardening as he read. "Interesting how all of this was arranged so quickly," he commented, adjusting his glasses, almost as if it was prepared in advance. The tension in the room increased when Dr. Baker entered with new tests from Daisy. "Sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss something urgent," she said, spreading the x-rays on the table. "We found something worrisome in the spine exams." While the adults argued downstairs, something unexpected was happening in the girls' room. Lily, who everyone thought was sleeping, was sitting at the window, talking quietly with a boy in a wheelchair in the hospital garden. Julian, Dennis' 16-year-old son, had managed to get close to the first-floor window using the access ramp. "My dad isn't a good person," he said to Lily, his voice low but clear. "I heard him talking on the phone last night. There's something about land, something important under your house." Lily, with the peculiar wisdom of her 6 years, absorbed every word, relating them to strange conversations she had heard between her father and unknown men in recent weeks. In the hallway, Alice watched the interaction discreetly, her heart tightening with old memories. She knew Julian's story well. A brilliant boy trapped in a body that betrayed him more and more due to a rare degenerative disease. She also knew Dennis Chambers better than she would have liked, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding her deceased daughter's removal from the position of head nurse 20 years ago. The meeting downstairs was interrupted by a sharp scream coming from the room. Everyone ran there, finding Daisy in the midst of a febrile seizure. Dr. Baker took control of the situation immediately, while Michelle held Lily, preventing her from approaching her sister. "She needs surgery," declared the doctor after stabilizing. "The little one. The infection has spread more than we thought, and that old fracture is pressing on an important nerve." Ted staggered, needing to lean against the wall. His face had lost all color. "I can't afford surgery," he murmured. "I'll pay," said George and Dennis at the same time, exchanging challenging looks afterward. "What I don't understand," interjected Melinda, the social worker, "is why you, Dennis, never helped your cousin before. According to the records, the family has been living in precarious conditions for years." The question hung in the air like a silent accusation. Dennis adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "Ted never asked for help, and I was busy with other matters." "Like taking care of your son?" asked Alice suddenly, her voice laden with a meaning that only Dennis seemed to understand. The businessman shot a cutting look at the nurse, who sustained his gaze without hesitation. At that moment, Lily tugged on George's jacket. "Uncle," she whispered, "I need to tell you something about what's under our house." The businessman bent down to listen to the girl, but was interrupted by the late and dramatic arrival of Judge Dana Albright, accompanied by her husband, City Councilman Oliver Sawyer. "I think we've arrived at an opportune moment," said Dana, her eyes sweeping over the crowded room. "I have here a temporary court order. The girls will be under state custody until we resolve this situation." The chaos that followed was interrupted by an unexpected sound. Quincy's cell phone rang, displaying a message that made the lawyer pale. On the screen, an old photo showed Dana Albright, much younger, next to Augustus Fisher, Ted's father, in front of the Albright mansion. The caption read only, "Some stories need to be unearthed, like the body in the farm's well." Dr. Irene Bell's office was on the third floor of an old building downtown. The pastel-colored walls and cozy furniture created a safe environment, especially designed for her younger patients. That Wednesday afternoon, the 58-year-old child psychologist watched Lily, who was drawing intently at a low table. "Can you tell me about this drawing?" asked Irene softly, noticing the dark figures that the girl traced with black crayon. "It's the man who visited our house at night," replied Lily without looking up from the paper. "He talked to my dad about water, a lot of water under our house." Irene made a discreet note in her notebook. It was her third session with Lily in a week since George had sought her out, worried about the girl's recurring nightmares. Outside the office, George waited anxiously. The last 72 hours had been a whirlwind. Dana Albright's court order to institutionalize the girls had been temporarily suspended, thanks to a brilliant legal maneuver by Quincy, who secured an injunction keeping the children under George's temporary custody while the case was investigated. "Mr. Montgomery," Irene's voice brought him back to the present. The psychologist invited him in, while her assistant took Lily to the waiting room where Michelle was waiting with Daisy, who was recovering from surgery in a children's wheelchair. "Her drawings are worrisome," began Irene, spreading several sheets on her desk. "Lily repeatedly represents this dark figure, always associated with nightly meetings and conversations about water. But there's something more." She picked up a specific drawing. "See this red stain in the corner? When I asked about it, Lily said it was Mom's secret." George felt a chill run down his spine. Their mother, Bernice, disappeared 2 years ago. "Ted says she abandoned the family, but you don't believe it," completed Irene, "and from what the drawings indicate, neither does Lily." The conversation was interrupted by urgent knocks on the door. It was Alice, the nurse from the hospital, who had become an unexpected ally in recent days. "Sorry to intrude," she said, breathless, "but something happened that you need to know. Julian, Dennis's son, tried... He tried... She needed to sit down, visibly shaken. "Calm down, Alice," asked Irene, offering a glass of water. "What happened to the boy?" "He tried to run away from home last night. He was found at the bus station buying a ticket to Phoenix. He had several of his father's documents, including some about a mineral water spring that exists exactly under the land where the girls lived." George and Irene exchanged meaningful looks. "That's why Dennis was so suddenly interested in helping his cousin," murmured the businessman. "There's more," continued Alice, lowering her voice. "Julian contacted me at the hospital before running away. He said he found something in his father's office about Bernice." At that moment, a scream coming from the waiting room made the three run out. They found Michelle hugging Daisy, while Lily pointed to the window, trembling. "The dark man!" shouted the girl. "He was there!" On the street, a black car sped off. George ran to the window in time to see the license plate partially. It started with 4KL. "We need to get the girls out of here," he decided, already grabbing his cell phone to call his driver. "Take them to my house," offered Alice. "No one would think to look for them there, and there's something you need to see, something I've kept for 20 years. Alice's house was in a quiet residential neighborhood, a modest but well-kept building with a small garden in front. While the girls settled into the living room, protected by Irene's comforting presence, the retired nurse led George to a room in the back. "This was my daughter, Rachel's room," she explained, her voice choked with emotion. "She was the head nurse at the hospital 20 years ago. She was the one who attended Augustus Fisher, Ted's father, on the night of the accident." Alice opened an old trunk and took out a yellowed envelope. Rachel kept a diary. In the last entry, she wrote about something she heard that night. A conversation between Arnold Albright and Dennis Chambers, who at the time was just a budding businessman. George took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, in addition to the diary pages, there was a photo that made his heart stop. Arnold Albright shaking hands with his father, Vincent Montgomery, in front of a piece of land that he recognized immediately. The same one where Lily's family's trailer now stood. "My father sold that land to Albright a week before passing away," said George, his voice hoarse with the painful memory. "It was his last deal." "And do you know what Rachel discovered that night?" asked Alice, her eyes shining with contained tears. "That land was never registered in Albright's name. The original deed signed by your father is still in effect." The revelation hit George like lightning. If the land was still legally in his name, that explained Dennis's desperation. To get custody of the girls, it was his way of gaining control over the property. In the living room, oblivious to the bombshell discovery, the three sisters shared a rare moment of peace. Daisy, still fragile after surgery, had fallen asleep in Michelle's lap, while Lily played with an old doll she found on the shelf. The moment was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Quincy, carrying a briefcase even more worn than usual. "You're not going to believe what I found," he said, spreading documents on the kitchen table. "I got access to the old records of the Albright farm. Augustus Fisher wasn't just the caretaker. He was a partner in a secret mineral water exploration project, and there's more. I found records of regular deposits made by Dana Albright to an account in Bernice's name. The last transfer was made 2 days before she disappeared." "So Dana knew Bernice?" asked Irene, who had joined them in the kitchen. "Not only did she know her," replied Quincy, grabbing his cell phone. "Look at this." The photo on the screen showed a much younger Dana, embracing a woman that everyone immediately recognized. It was Bernice. But the most shocking thing was the date. The photo had been taken just 3 months ago in Phoenix. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of breaking glass in the living room. Everyone ran to find Ted Fisher standing in the back doorway, holding a broken picture frame. In the photo, Rachel, Alice's daughter, smiled next to Bernice. "I knew it," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "I knew she hadn't abandoned us willingly." But before anyone could react, headlights illuminated the room through the window. A black car, the same one from earlier, had stopped in front of the house. The driver's door opened, revealing a figure that no one expected to see. Oliver Sawyer, Dana's husband, carrying a briefcase identical to the one that Quincy had found in the courthouse. "I think," he said, his voice echoing in the silence of the night, "it's time to reveal the true story of the Albright Farms well." The air in the small room of Alice's house grew thick with Oliver Sawyer's arrival. His words about the Albright farm well hung like a dark cloud over everyone present. George instinctively placed himself between the newcomer and the girls, while Quincy discreetly activated the recorder on his cell phone. "Let's talk outside," suggested George, his firm voice leaving no room for discussion. "No," interrupted Alice, surprising everyone with her authority. "This is my home, and after 20 years of keeping secrets, I think I deserve to hear the whole truth." Oliver hesitated, his eyes scanning the faces in the room until they settled on Ted, who was still holding the broken picture frame with the photo of Rachel and Bernice. "Did you know?" asked Ted, his voice trembling. "Did you know where she was all this time?" "It's not that simple," replied Oliver, loosening his expensive tie. 20 years ago, when Augustus Fisher discovered the spring on the back of the farm, he had no idea what he had found. That water wasn't ordinary. Preliminary tests showed unique medicinal properties. "And what does that have to do with my wife's disappearance?" Ted took a step forward, but was restrained by George. "It has everything to do with it," continued Oliver, placing his briefcase on the kitchen table. "Because Bernice, working as a cleaner at the Albrights' house, found documents proving that Arnold planned to take Vincent Montgomery's land through a financial scam." George felt his body tense up. That was the scam that had ruined his father. "But she wasn't the only one to find out," interfered Alice, her voice laden with emotion. "Rachel, my daughter, found out too. That's why she suffered." "The car accident?" completed Oliver, surprising everyone. "It wasn't an accident, Mrs. Alice. Rachel was removed because she knew too much, just as Bernice needed to be removed years later." At that moment, Lily, who everyone thought was distracted with the doll, stood up and walked to Oliver. "The dark man in my drawings," she said, her big eyes fixed on the politician. "It was you." Oliver's face paled. On the sofa, Michelle hugged Daisy tighter, her eyes widening with her sister's revelation. "The nightly visits," continued Lily, her childish voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. "You talked to my dad about money, a lot of money." "I tried to help you," defended Oliver, running his hands through his graying hair. "When I found out that Dennis planned to use Ted to gain access to the land, I tried to warn him." "Warn me?" Ted exploded. "You got me drunk. You showed up with bottles of whiskey, said it was to celebrate the deals." "To keep him out of the way," interjected a new voice from the doorway. It was Julian, Dennis's son, in his wheelchair, pushed by a woman who made Ted stagger. Bernice. Time seemed to freeze. Daisy, even sleepy, recognized her mother immediately, stretching her little arms out towards her. Michelle, on the other hand, stood up abruptly, placing herself in front of her younger sister in a defensive position. "You abandoned us," accused the teenager, tears running down her face, "left us alone with him." Bernice took a step forward, her face marked by years of suffering and guilt. "I never wanted to abandon you, but that night, when I confronted Dana with the documents I found, she gave you two options," completed Julian, his voice weak but determined. "Disappear or face the consequences." It was the same choice they gave Rachel years before. Alice let out a choked sob, years of doubt finally finding answers. "How do you know all of this?" George asked the boy. Because I found the files on my father's computer, replied Julian. All the transactions, all the secret agreements, the water from that spring. It has properties that could help people like me, but my father only saw profit. And you came looking for me in Phoenix, said Bernice, approaching the boy. Showed me everything, gave me the courage to come back. Oliver watched the scene with growing nervousness. You don't understand. If this story comes out, it's not just Dana's career that's over. There are powerful people involved. International investors. Like the investors who finance the experimental clinic where Julian is receiving treatment, asked Quincy, removing his glasses to calmly clean them. Interesting how all roads lead to the same spring. At that moment, Daisy, who had freed herself from Michelle's protective arms, staggered to Bernice. The girl was still weak from the surgery, but her eyes shone with unwavering certainty. "Mommy," she said simply, holding out her arms. The innocent gesture broke all barriers. Bernice fell to her knees, hugging her youngest daughter while sobbing. Lily ran to join the hug, but Michelle kept her distance, years of hurt not being undone with a single moment. "There's something you need to see," said Julian, taking a flash drive from his pocket. "They're the recordings from the security cameras at the Albright farm. From the night Augustus Fisher confronted Arnold about the scam against Mr. Montgomery's father." George felt his heart tighten. Those recordings could finally reveal the truth about the night that changed his life forever. But before they could connect the flash drive to Quincy's notebook, headlights illuminated the street again. 2 cars stopped abruptly in front of the house. From the first, Dennis Chambers descended, his face contorted into a mask of fury upon seeing his son there. From the second emerged Dana Albright, carrying a red file that everyone recognized. It was the original land sale process. What no one expected was the third person who got out of the car, an elderly gentleman wearing an impeccable suit and leaning on an elegant cane. Arnold Albright, who everyone thought was in a nursing home in Miami, had come to settle his own accounts with the past. "I think," said the patriarch of the Albright family, his voice still powerful despite his age, "it's time to tell the truth about that night, including about the real buyer of the land, someone that none of you ever suspected." Arnold Albright's imposing presence transformed the small room of Alice's house into a stage where decades of secrets were about to be revealed. The patriarch, at 78 years old, moved with the same authority that had characterized him throughout his life, although his eyes betrayed a tiredness that went beyond the physical. "Dad," began Dana, taking a step forward, "you should be at the clinic. The doctor was clear about my condition," interrupted Arnold, his voice cutting. "Perhaps that's exactly why I need to put things in order, while I still can." Dennis, who until then had kept his eyes fixed on Julian, turned sharply to the patriarch. "Don't do this, Arnold. Think about the agreement." "The agreement," thundered the old businessman. "The same agreement that destroyed so many lives, that separated a mother from her daughters, that led a young nurse to a tragic fate." Alice let out a choked sob upon hearing the reference to her daughter Rachel. Her hands squeezed an embroidered handkerchief, the only object she kept of her daughter, besides the photos and the diary. "Mr. Albright," interjected George, his voice controlled but firm, "what do you know about the sale of that land? About what happened to my father?" Arnold walked slowly to an empty armchair, leaning heavily on his cane. Everyone watched in silence, including the children. Daisy had fallen asleep in Bernice's lap, while Lily stayed close to Julian, as if the teenager in the wheelchair represented some kind of safety. "Vincent Montgomery," began Arnold, "was a man of integrity. When he discovered the true value of that land, the spring with medicinal properties, his first reaction was to think about how that could help the community." "But you cheated him," accused George, taking a step forward. "Forced the sale for a fraction of the real value. No, interrupted Arnold, surprising everyone. I tried to buy it, it's true. I offered a lot of money, but Vincent refused. He already had another buyer. The revelation fell like a bomb in the already tense environment. Quincy, who continued to discreetly record the conversation, leaned forward, his glasses reflecting the soft light of the lamp. "What buyer?" asked the lawyer. "Rachel Souza," replied Arnold, looking directly at Alice. "Your daughter, Mrs. Alice, had discovered the properties of the water through secret tests in the hospital laboratory. She gathered a group of doctors and researchers, got investors. She planned to transform that area into a treatment center, accessible to people with rare diseases." Julian straightened up in his wheelchair, his eyes shining with a mixture of surprise and understanding. "That's why my father always had so much interest in that area." "Exactly," confirmed Arnold. "Dennis discovered Rachel's plans through confidential hospital documents. He saw an opportunity for profit where she saw healing." Bernice, who was rocking Daisy gently, raised her voice for the first time. "That's why Rachel started passing me documents to keep. She knew she was being followed." "The thing," continued Arnold, "is that the sale to Rachel was practically closed when Vincent—" He hesitated, casting a regretful look at George. "When your father passed away, the process was incomplete. The original deed was never effectively transferred, so the land is still in George's father's name," asked Quincy, removing his glasses to clean them, a habit that betrayed his nervousness. "Not exactly," replied Arnold, opening the red file that Dana had brought. "It's in the name of a trust fund created by Vincent Montgomery one day before his passing, a fund whose beneficiary would be revealed only when certain conditions were met." Michelle, who had remained silent until then, approached the table where Arnold spread the documents. "What conditions?" The old businessman smiled slightly, admiring the teenager's curiosity. "The beneficiary would be revealed when the truth about all the injustices committed came to light. Vincent was smarter than any of us imagined." "But how did my father know?" began George, his voice failing with emotion. "He didn't know," interrupted a new voice from the door. Everyone turned to see Irene, the psychologist, who had left momentarily and now returned with an old box in her arms. "But Rachel knew, and she left everything documented." Alice stood up abruptly, recognizing the box. "That was in her room. It disappeared after the accident." "It didn't disappear," explained Irene. "Rachel contacted me a week before the accident. She was my patient and friend. She asked me to keep this, said it was life insurance." The psychologist placed the box on the table next to Arnold's documents. Inside, there were dozens of cassette tapes, a diary different from the one Alice kept, and photos. Many photos. "She recorded everything," said Irene, picking up one of the tapes. "Every conversation, every suspicious meeting, including the last conversation with Dennis Chambers when he threatened her." Dennis advanced threateningly, but was stopped by a shout from Julian. "Stop, Dad, enough violence!" The shout startled Daisy, who woke up crying. Bernice tried to calm her, while Lily moved closer to Julian, as if wanting to protect him. "You don't understand, son," said Dennis, his voice trembling. "I did all this for you, to find a cure." "No," cut Julian, his voice laden with decades of contained hurt. "You did it for greed. Rachel wanted to make the treatment available to everyone. You wanted exclusivity, patents, profit, and you used my husband to achieve that," completed Bernice, her voice firm despite the tears. "Manipulated Ted when he was most vulnerable, after I lost our baby early in the pregnancy, used alcohol to control him, to have access to the land through him." Ted, who was leaning against the wall, slid to the floor, sobbing. "Forgive me," he murmured repeatedly. "Forgive me." Dana Albright, who watched everything with a growing pallor, finally spoke. So the deposits I made to Bernice were part of the agreement, completed Oliver, her husband, to keep Bernice away in exchange for monthly payments. It was the way we found to protect her after she discovered everything. Protect me, Bernice laughed bitterly. Separating me from my daughters was protection, leaving them with a father destroyed by guilt and alcohol. At that moment, a noise coming from the street caught everyone's attention. Headlights illuminated the room through the windows, and raised voices could be heard from outside. "It's the investors," said Arnold, his voice tired. "They found out I left the clinic. They know I came to tell everything." "What investors?" asked George, but his question was answered by the sound of tires screeching on the asphalt and car doors slamming. Quincy ran to the window, peeking through the curtain. His face paled visibly. "It's them, the same men who were with Dennis in that secret meeting at the hospital." But before anyone could react, Lily took Julian's hand and declared with a wisdom beyond her 6 years, "The water that heals can also hurt, right? That's what Rachel discovered. That's why she was so scared." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Arnold Albright held the red file with renewed strength, while Dana looked at her father with a growing and devastating understanding. "My God," she whispered. "So that's why that well on the farm was sealed with concrete on the same night that Rachel—" "Yes," replied Arnold, his voice barely above a whisper. "And now they're here to make sure that some secrets remain buried. But they weren't counting on one thing." He took one last document from the file. Rachel left a letter addressed to the true owner of the land, a person that no one ever suspected. The tension in the room of Alice's house reached its peak. When Arnold Albright began to open the sealed envelope with Rachel's letter, the sound of footsteps in the front garden grew closer, while Quincy and George quickly turned off the lights, leaving only the lamp on. "We need to get the children out of here," whispered Bernice, still holding Daisy asleep. Michelle was already by her side, hugging Lily protectively. "There's an exit through the back," indicated Alice, her voice trembling slightly. "Through the laundry room." "Nobody's going anywhere," declared Julian, his voice surprisingly firm. "If we keep running, they'll never stop chasing us." The boy in the wheelchair was right. Years of running and secrets had cost too much to everyone present. George nodded, placing himself strategically between the door and the rest of the group. "Read the letter," he asked Arnold, "before they come in." The patriarch of the Albrights cleared his throat gently and began to read. "Dear Alice, if you are reading this letter, it means that my suspicions were correct. What I discovered in the spring is not just water with medicinal properties. It's much more complex and dangerous than we imagined. The tests I did in secret revealed that the water contains a unique compound capable of altering cells at a molecular level. In small doses and with the proper treatment, it can aid in the cure of various diseases, but in its natural state, in large quantities, it's lethal. That's what Dennis discovered when he started doing secret tests in his private laboratory. He didn't want to create a treatment center. He wanted to market the water as a miracle product without caring about the consequences. But Vincent Montgomery discovered the truth. On the night he supposedly signed the sale papers, he actually created a trust fund in the name of the only person he knew would use that discovery for good. You, Alice. Yes, you are the true owner of the land. Vincent transferred everything to your name because he knew of our friendship, because he trusted my word, when I said that you were the most honest person I've ever known. The original documents are hidden in the most obvious and, therefore, safest place, in the hospital's dead file, inside Vincent Montgomery's own medical record. No one ever thought to look there. Keep our children safe. Take care of little Julian. The tests I did show that the water, properly treated, can help with his condition. But above all, don't let greed win over compassion. With love, Rachel. The silence that followed the reading was broken by loud knocks on the front door. Alice, who listened to everything with silent tears running down her face, stood up slowly. "So that's why," she said, her voice gaining strength, "that's why Rachel insisted so much on taking me to meet Vincent Montgomery before him. Before he passed, they planned everything." "But the documents," interjected Quincy, "are they still at the hospital?" "No," replied Julian, rummaging in his backpack. "I found them 3 days ago. That's why I tried to run away to Phoenix to find Bernice. I knew I needed help to—" His sentence was interrupted by a crash. The front door had been broken down, and 3 men in suits entered the room. The first, a man of about 60 with perfectly styled grey hair, smiled upon seeing Arnold. "Dr. Albright," he said, his voice artificially cordial, "you gave us a lot of trouble running away from the clinic like that." "Douglas," replied Arnold, maintaining his dignity, still trying to control everything and everyone. Douglas Montenegro, CEO of the largest pharmaceutical laboratory in the country, took a step forward. "Control is a strong word. I prefer to say that I protect investments, and at this moment I need to protect a 20-year investment." "The water was never yours," declared Alice, surprising everyone with the firmness of her voice. "Rachel discovered what you intended to do with it, turn it into an addictive drug, taking advantage of its altering properties to create dependence in patients." "A smart woman, your daughter," commented Douglas, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Too smart for her own good." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Lily, who everyone thought was hiding behind Michelle, took a step forward. "Daisy's dream man," she said, pointing to Douglas. "She always wakes up crying when she dreams about you." Little Daisy, as if responding to her sister's words, began to stir in Bernice's lap, murmuring in her sleep, "The black water. The black water hurts." Douglas momentarily lost his composure, and Dennis took advantage of the distraction to try one last gambit. "We can make a deal," he said, desperate. "We can all still profit from this. Julian needs the treatment and—" "No," shouted his son. "I don't want a cure based on the suffering of others. Rachel found a way to purify the water, to use it correctly. It's all here." He raised a thin folder. "In the notes she left hidden in the hospital basement." "The basement," murmured Alice, her eyes widening. "The same basement where she used to meet with Vincent Montgomery to discuss the plans for the treatment center." Dana Albright, who watched everything in silence, suddenly took a step forward. "Dad," she said, turning to Arnold, "it's time to fix our mistakes." She took her cell phone and, to everyone's astonishment, especially her husband Oliver's, pressed a speed dial button. "Agent Carter, this is Judge Albright. Activate the protocol we discussed." "Yes, now." Douglas Montenegro completely lost his smile. "What did you do?" "What I should have done a long time ago," replied Dana. "For the past 6 months, there has been a federal investigation into the activities of your laboratory. Every document, every illegal test, every threat, everything has been documented." Sirens began to sound in the distance, approaching rapidly. The men who accompanied Douglas pulled out guns, but Ted, in a surprisingly agile movement, knocked one of them down, while George subdued the other. "You don't understand," said Douglas, his mask of civility completely undone. "That water can revolutionize medicine. The profits would be—" "The profits?" interrupted Julian. "What about the lives? What is Rachel's life worth? My mother's, who you also threatened when she discovered your plans. What is the peace of that family worth?" He pointed to the 3 sisters. At that moment, patrol cars stopped in front of the house, their blue and red lights illuminating the room through the windows. But before the officers entered, Lily walked up to Douglas and, with the devastating innocence of a child, said, "The water doesn't hurt anyone anymore. Rachel fixed She told me in the dream." The powerful man looked at the little girl with a mixture of confusion and defeat. Behind him, Arnold Albright smiled sadly as he murmured, "It's amazing how the innocent always speak the most painful truth." Handcuffs clinked in the room as Douglas and his men were arrested. Dennis tried to flee through the back but was restrained by Quincy, who revealed that he had called in reinforcements to cover all exits. As the dust settled and the lights were turned on again, Alice held the documents that would prove her ownership of the land. But her gaze was fixed on an old photo that had fallen from Rachel's folder. In it, her daughter smiled next to Vincent Montgomery, both in front of a small community clinic. "We're going to realize their dream," she said, her voice choked with emotion but determined. "The clinic will be built, and the first patient," she looked at Julian with a maternal smile, "has been waiting for too long." The next morning dawned with a gentle drizzle in Harmony Glens. At George's mansion, where everyone had gone after the night's events, the silence was broken only by the clinking of cups in the kitchen, where Alice was preparing coffee for the exhausted group. Bernice, who had not left her daughter's side all night, watched Daisy sleep on the living room sofa, while Lily played silently with an old doll that Alice had given her. Michelle, still maintaining her emotional distance from her mother, was sitting near the window, exchanging messages with Julian, who had been taken home by Dana Albright, one of the conditions of the plea bargain she had made, against Douglas Montenegro. "Coffee is ready," announced Alice, entering the room with a tray. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from contained emotion. The documents that proved her ownership of the land were safe with Quincy, who had spent the night organizing the next legal steps. "We need to talk about the next few days," said George, accepting a cup. "Now that the truth has come out, we have to think about everyone's safety." Ted, who had spent the entire night sitting in a corner, practically in a catatonic state, finally raised his head. I want to check myself in. I need real help this time." Bernice looked at her ex-husband with a mixture of compassion and sadness. "You'll get through this, Ted. You're not alone in this fight anymore." "There's a clinic in Boston," interjected Irene, who had arrived early to provide psychological support to the family. "It specializes in cases of trauma and addiction. We can start the admission process today." At that moment, Lily dropped her doll and walked up to her father, surprising everyone. "Dad," she said, her childish voice laden with a wisdom beyond her years, "the black water won't hurt you anymore." Ted swallowed hard, tears running down his face. "No, honey, never again." "Julian sent a message," announced Michelle, finally joining the group. "Agent Carter, from the FBI, wants to talk to all of us this afternoon. They found more documents in Douglas's office. And there's something else," completed Quincy, who had just arrived. "I got access to the hospital's old files. You won't believe what I found." The lawyer opened his worn briefcase and spread some old photos on the coffee table. In one of them, Rachel appeared next to Vincent Montgomery, and a woman that everyone immediately recognized. It was Julian's mother. "Clara," whispered Alice, recognizing her daughter's old friend. "She worked in the hospital laboratory with Rachel, and she also discovered Douglas's plans," explained Quincy. "That's why she left town pregnant, without giving explanations. She knew that the baby she was expecting, Julian, had a rare genetic condition, and that the water from the spring, properly treated, could be his only hope. That's why Dennis was so obsessed," concluded George. "It wasn't just about the water, it was about his son." "But he chose the wrong path," said Alice, her voice firm. Clara entrusted the preliminary studies to Rachel, who continued the research, in secret. And now, with the notes that Julian found, "We can do it the right way," completed Bernice, "the clinic that Rachel and Vincent dreamed of." Daisy chose this moment to wake up, her sleepy little eyes scanning the room until they found her mother. "Mommy," she called softly. "I dreamed about the pretty lady again." "What lady, honey?" asked Bernice, sitting next to her youngest daughter. "The one who takes care of the water. She said that now everything is okay, that no one will get hurt anymore." The adults exchanged meaningful glances. Daisy's innocent words seemed to carry the echo of Rachel's promises. A sound of a car parking caught everyone's attention. Through the window they saw Dana Albright getting out of her official vehicle, accompanied by an elegant lady carrying a bulky file. "Agent Carter," identified Quincy, "and by the size of that file, there are more revelations to come," completed George. While Alice went to greet the newcomers, Lily turned her attention to a drawing she was making discreetly. Unlike the dark drawings from before, this one showed a white building surrounded by trees with people smiling. "It's the new clinic," she explained when she noticed Michelle watching. "Julian will get better there. Daisy's dream lady said so." Dana and Agent Carter entered the room, bringing with them not only documents, but also a series of decisions that would forever change the destiny of all those present. "During this morning's operation," began the agent, "we found something in Douglas Montenegro's private safe that you need to see." She opened her file and removed an old diary, its pages yellowed with time. On the cover, in elegant lettering, read, "Property of Clara Cardoso." Julian, who had just arrived accompanied by a nurse, gasped upon recognizing his mother's handwriting. "This diary," continued Agent Carter, "contains not only the original research on the water, but also reveals a network of protection that existed in Harmony Glens. People who knew the truth and tried to protect this knowledge from falling into the wrong hands." "The Clear Water Network," murmured Alice, the name surfacing in her memory like a distant echo. "Rachel mentioned that once." "Exactly," confirmed Dana. "And you won't believe who was the leader of this network." Before she could complete, however, a new visitor appeared at the door, Arnold Albright, leaning on his cane, but with a determined glint in his eyes. "I think," he said, "it's time to tell about the real reason why Vincent Montgomery chose Alice as guardian of the land, and about the role my family actually played in this whole story." Arnold Albright settled into an armchair near the fireplace in George's mansion, his countenance carrying the weight of decades of secrets. The silence in the room was almost palpable as everyone adjusted themselves to hear his revelations. "First of all," he began, his voice firm despite his age, "I need to confess something to you, George. Your father didn't commit suicide." The statement hit George like a physical blow. He staggered, needing to lean against the wall. "What do you mean? All these years?" "Vincent Montgomery was one of the most honest men I've ever known," continued Arnold, "and also one of the most intelligent. He discovered about the water long before any of us, through tests he sent to laboratories abroad." Alice, who was serving more coffee with trembling hands, almost dropped the cup upon hearing the next revelation. "He sought out Rachel because he knew she was incorruptible. And he sought you out, Alice, because Rachel trusted you more than anyone else. The plan was to create a network of protection around the spring, people who would ensure that the water would never be used for wrong purposes." "The Clear Water Network," murmured Dana, leafing through Clara Cardoso's diary. "Exactly," confirmed Arnold, "but Douglas Montenegro found out. He had been keeping an eye on the medicinal properties of the water for years, collecting samples, secretly and doing tests in clandestine laboratories." Julian, in his wheelchair, leaned forward. "And my mother? How did she get involved in all this?" "Clara was brilliant," replied Arnold, a sad smile crossing his face. "She was the first to realize the dangerous potential of the water in its raw state. She was the one who developed the initial purification process, which Rachel later perfected." "But why did she run away?" asked the boy, his voice choked with emotion. "Because she discovered that she was pregnant with you, son. Dennis's voice sounded from the door, where he had just arrived, escorted by 2 federal agents. Agent Carter had authorized his presence for this specific conversation. "She knew about your genetic condition even before you were born," he continued, seeming suddenly aged. "And she knew that the water, treated correctly, could be your only hope. But she also knew that Douglas would never allow the treatment to be made available for free." "And that's when everything started to crumble," resumed Arnold. "Douglas discovered about Clara's pregnancy, about the baby's condition. He saw an opportunity to pressure Dennis, who at the time was just a budding businessman desperate to save his future son." Bernice, who was hugging Daisy protectively, raised her voice. "And where does my husband fit into this story? Why involve our family?" "Because Ted was the last link with the past," replied Arnold. "Your father, Augustus Fisher, was more than our caretaker. He was part of the Clearwater Network, responsible for monitoring the spring daily, ensuring that no one approached without authorization." Ted raised his head, his eyes red from crying so much. "So when my father had that accident—" "It wasn't an accident," completed Agent Carter, removing more documents from her folder. "We found evidence in Douglas' safe. He had your father's car sabotaged when he discovered that Augustus planned to report the illegal tests that were being done with the water." Lily, who was playing quietly in a corner with her doll, suddenly stood up and walked to Julian. "That's why you kept looking at our house from your room window. You knew everything?" The teenager smiled sadly. "Not everything, little one, but I knew there was something special about that place. I could feel it somehow." "It's the water," said Daisy sleepily. "It sings under the ground." Everyone looked at the girl, surprised. Irene, the psychologist, made a quick note in her notebook. "The children always knew," she said. "That's why Lily's drawings, Daisy's dreams, they could sense the truth that we adults were trying so hard to hide." Michelle, who had maintained an observant silence, finally spoke. "And now, what happens to the water, to the clinic that Rachel wanted to build?" Alice straightened up in her chair, a new determination shining in her eyes. "Now we do what should have been done 20 years ago. The clinic will be built, open to all who need it, with the purification process that Rachel developed, that she perfected based on my mother's research," completed Julian, a genuine smile lighting up his face for the first time. "And you'll be the first patient," said George, surprising everyone. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to be part of this project. Not for the money or the power, but to honor my father's memory." "There's one more thing," said Dana, taking one last envelope from her folder. "We found this in Douglas's old office. It's a letter from Clara, written shortly before—" She hesitated, looking at Julian. "Before she left," completed the boy softly. "You can read it, Judge. I think we all need to hear it." Dana opened the envelope carefully and began to read. "My dear son, if you are reading this, it means that the truth has finally come to light. The water that runs under that land was never intended to create fortunes or power. It is a gift, a blessing that must be shared." Rachel understood this. Vincent understood. And now the time has come for others to understand too. The purification process I developed is not complete without the final component, something that Rachel discovered and perfected. She called it the catalyst of love. It sounds like scientific nonsense, I know, but she discovered that the water only reaches its maximum healing potential when it is administered with genuine compassion. That's why we chose Alice as guardian. That's why Rachel documented everything so meticulously. And that's why, my son, I am sure that you will heal. Not by the power of the water itself, but by the power of the love that has always existed around it. The love of a mother for her son, of a father for his community, of a nurse for her patients. Forgive your father. He made mistakes trying to protect me, but deep down, everything he did was out of love for you. With all my heart, Clara. The silence that followed the reading was broken by the soft sound of Dennis crying. For the first time in years, father and son looked at each other without bitterness, only with understanding. At that moment, a commotion at the entrance of the mansion caught everyone's attention. Quincy entered hastily, carrying an old folder. "You won't believe it," he said, breathless. "I just found it at the courthouse. It's Vincent Montgomery's original will, with a secret clause that no one knew about. And along with it," he raised, "a flash drive worn by time. Rachel's last recordings." George's office, on the second floor of the mansion, transformed into an improvised investigation center. A notebook was connected to a large television on the wall, while Quincy inserted the flash drive found with Rachel's recordings. The curtains were drawn, plunging the room into a respectful dimness. "Some of these recordings are corrupted," explained the lawyer, adjusting his glasses. "But I managed to recover the last one, dated 3 days before she passed." Rachel's face filled the screen, surprisingly clear despite the years. Alice choked back a sob upon seeing her daughter. The same determined eyes, the same gentle smile that she carried even in the most difficult moments. "If someone is seeing this recording," began Rachel on the screen, "it means that the time has finally come for the truth to come to light. My name is Rachel Souza, and what I'm about to reveal may seem crazy, but every word is true." She picked up an old notebook, leafing through it in front of the camera. "These are Clara Cardoso's original notes on the spring water. But there's something that not even Clara discovered. Something I found only recently studying old samples." In the room, Julian leaned forward in his wheelchair, his eyes fixed on the screen. Bernice held Daisy, who had woken up and was watching the recording with an attention unusual for her age. Lily sat on the floor next to Julian, while Michelle remained near the window, her posture tense. "The water has a unique property," continued Rachel. "It not only heals, it connects. I discovered this accidentally, when I started dreaming about people I had never met, but who were somehow linked to the spring." Daisy visibly shivered in her mother's lap. "Like me!" she exclaimed. "Children," said Rachel in the recording, as if responding to the little one, "are especially sensitive to this connection. They can feel, they can see through the veil that separates past and present when they are close to the water." Irene, who was taking notes furiously, raised her head. "That explains Lily's drawings, Daisy's dreams." "But there's more," continued Rachel. "The purification process I developed is not just chemical, it's energetic. The water needs to be treated with love, with pure intention. That's why Douglas's experiments always went wrong. He tried to force the water to do his will, when in fact, it needs to be gently guided." She picked up another notebook, newer. "Here is the complete process, including something I discovered studying the dreams of the children who lived near the spring. They called it water song, a specific frequency that, when applied during the purification process, enhances the healing properties without any side effects." At that moment, the recording began to fail, the image flickering, but Rachel's voice continued, clear as crystal. "Vincent Montgomery understood this before any of us. That's why he chose my mother as guardian, not only of the land, but of the sacred knowledge that it carries. Alice has always had the gift of healing with love, long before any of us realized the real power of the spring." Alice covered her face with her hands, tears running through her fingers. George, discreetly, offered her a handkerchief. The recording continued, now showing Rachel in another environment. It seemed to be the hospital basement. I hid copies of all the documentation in various places. Douglas may have found some, but never all. The most important one is The image failed again, recovering only partially. Inside the old doll in my mother's room, the same doll that... The recording ended abruptly, leaving the room in silence. But before anyone could speak, Lily jumped up. "The doll!" she exclaimed. "The one Mrs. Alice gave me to play with." Everyone turned to see the antique porcelain doll that the girl was holding, the same one that Alice had given her earlier, taken from a box of memories. With trembling hands, Alice took the doll. She always stayed on the shelf in Rachel's room. After she passed, I never had the courage to touch anything. Quincy approached, examining the doll with experienced eyes. "There's a different seam here on the back," he pointed out, as if it had been redone. "Can I?" asked George, holding out his hand. Carefully, he opened the old seam, revealing a secret compartment inside the doll's body. From there, he removed a small flash drive and a yellowed envelope. "It's Rachel's handwriting," whispered Alice, recognizing the calligraphy on the envelope. Quincy quickly connected the new flash drive to the computer. The screen filled with documents, chemical formulas, detailed notes, records of experiments. But it was the envelope that held everyone's attention. Dana Albright, who watched everything in silence, finally spoke. "I think we should read Vincent Montgomery's will first. The two things may be connected." Quincy nodded, opening the old folder he had brought from the courthouse. The will was there, its pages yellowed with time, but perfectly legible. "I, Vincent Montgomery," read Quincy, "in full mental capacity, in addition to the provisions already known, leave a secret clause regarding the land of the spring." The lawyer stopped, his eyes widening as he read the next paragraph. "My God," he murmured. "What is it?" asked George, tense. "The land," continued Quincy, his voice trembling slightly, "was not left only to Alice. He created a kind of guardian council formed by 5 families, the Sousas, the Cardosos, the Fishers, the Montgomerys, and the Albrights." "The Albrights?" exclaimed Dana, shocked. "Yes," confirmed Quincy. "Your father, Arnold, was part of the original plan. Vincent knew he would need the power and influence of the Albrights to protect the spring, but something went wrong." "Douglas Montenegro," interrupted Arnold, his voice tired. "He discovered the plan, threatened to expose secrets that would destroy all the families involved. I chickened out. I betrayed Vincent's trust." At that moment, Daisy slipped from Bernice's lap and walked to the center of the room. With the characteristic innocence of her 4 years, she took the envelope that had fallen from the doll. "The pretty lady from the dream wants us to read it," she said, holding out the envelope to Alice. With trembling hands, Alice opened the envelope. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper and a small antique key. "Mom," she began to read, her voice choked with emotion. "If you are reading this, it means that the children have found the way. They always do. The water guides them, as it guided Clara, as it guided Vincent, as it is guiding all of us now." But before she could continue, a noise coming from the garden interrupted the reading. Everyone ran to the window. Down there, a group of people gathered, old residents of Harmony Glens, some who everyone recognized as part of the original families mentioned in the will. And in the center of the group, a figure that made Alice let out a muffled cry. An elderly lady leaning on a cane, her eyes shining with the same determination that everyone recognized in Rachel. "Grandma Antoinette," whispered Alice, "the midwife who brought Rachel into the world, who knew all the secrets of the water long before any of us." The lady raised her eyes to the window, as if she could feel all the eyes upon her. In her hands, she held an old book, a diary that everyone sensed contained the answers that were still missing. The living room of George's mansion, which had already witnessed so many revelations in the last few hours, now accommodated one more crucial character in that story. Grandma Antoinette, at 92 years old, sat in the main armchair with the dignity of a queen. Her eyes, still alive and bright, scanned each face present before landing on the old diary in her lap. "It's been 58 years," she began, her voice surprisingly firm, "since I discovered the secret of the spring. It was when I helped bring Rachel into the world." Alice, sitting at the feet of the old midwife as she used to do in her childhood, held her wrinkled hand with affection. "You never told me this story, Grandma Antoinette." "Because it wasn't time, my child. Every secret has its time to come to light." The elderly woman opened the diary carefully. "That night there was a strong storm. You were having difficulties in childbirth, and I had already exhausted all my knowledge of midwifery. That's when your grandmother took me to the spring." "My mother?" asked Alice, surprised. "Yes. Benedita knew the secrets of the water long before any of us. Her family had kept this knowledge for generations." Grandma Antoinette flipped through some pages of the diary. Here it is. The first note about Rachel's birth: "The water sang when the girl was born. The same song I heard 50 years before, when Vincent Montgomery came into the world." George straightened up in his chair. "Did you know my father when he was born?" "I helped bring all of you into the world," replied the elderly woman with a gentle smile. "Vincent, Arnold, Clara, Rachel, all were born with the blessing of the spring water, and all in some way were chosen to protect its secret." Julian, who was listening attentively, leaned forward in his wheelchair. "What about me? Why was I born like this?" Grandma Antoinette's smile took on a tone of mystery. "Your condition, my young man, is not a curse. It's a gift. You are more sensitive to the water than anyone here, except perhaps—" She looked at Daisy and Lily, who were playing quietly in a corner of the room. "The children," murmured Irene, the psychologist. "They always knew, didn't they?" "Yes," confirmed the elderly woman. "Children born near the spring develop a special connection with it. Rachel discovered this in her research, but I had known it all along. That's why Daisy dreams of Rachel, why Lily could see through the lies of the adults." At that moment, Daisy stood up and walked to Grandma Antoinette, her little steps still insecure after the surgery. "Do you also see the pretty lady in the dreams?" The old woman laughed softly. "Not anymore, little one, but I saw her a long time ago. Rachel has always been special. She was born during what we call the blue hour, when the spring water is at its strongest." "And what exactly does the water do?" asked Dana Albright, who maintained her professional posture despite the glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. "The water heals," replied Grandma Antoinette, "but not in the way Douglas Montenegro thought. It's not a miraculous or instant cure. It's a process that requires love, dedication, and above all, pure intention." She removed an old photo from the diary, showing a group of people in front of a small stone building. This was the original treatment site, before it was destroyed by greed and fear. Vincent Montgomery financed its construction in secret, and Rachel transformed it into an improvised research center. "That's why she spent so much time in the hospital basement," said Alice, understanding. "She was recreating the original experiments." "Exactly," confirmed the elderly woman. "But Rachel discovered something else, something that not even I knew. The water doesn't act alone. It needs a human catalyst, someone with the natural gift of healing." Her eyes turned to Alice. "Like you, my child. Why do you think Vincent left the land in your name? He knew that you had the same gift as your mother, as your grandmother." Ted, who had remained silent until then, cleared his throat. "And what about me? Why did alcohol affect me so much near that house?" "Because you are also sensitive to the water, Ted," replied Grandma Antoinette gently. "But your sensitivity was used against you. The water amplifies emotions, feelings. Douglas knew this and used it to manipulate you, to keep you unstable." Bernice squeezed Ted's hand. ex-husband, a gesture of understanding and forgiveness that was worth more than 1,000 words. "But I still don't understand," interjected Quincy, adjusting his glasses. "Why create a council with the 5 families? Why not simply leave the land to one person?" Grandma Antoinette smiled as if expecting this question. "Because the water needs balance. Each family represents a necessary aspect. The Souzas with the gift of healing, the Montgomerys with the resources to protect, the Cardosos with the scientific knowledge, the Fishers with the connection to the earth, and the Albrights with the power to legitimize and defend legally." She turned another page of the diary, revealing an intricate drawing, a 5-pointed star with ancient symbols in each vertex. "This is the symbol of the original council, drawn by your grandmother Alice. Each point represents a family, and in the center, the spring," completed Lily, who had approached silently. "Like in my drawing." Everyone looked at the drawing that the girl had made earlier, surprisingly similar to the one in the diary, despite its childish simplicity. "Now, do you understand why we need to reunite all the families again?" asked Grandma Antoinette. "The treatment that can help Julian, that can heal so many people, will only work when the circle is complete again." Arnold Albright stood up with difficulty, leaning on his cane. "Then it's time to correct the mistakes of the past, to honor the legacy of Vincent, of Rachel, of all who protected this secret." But before he could continue, a sharp sound cut through the air. Quincy's cell phone rang insistently. The lawyer answered, his face paling as he heard the message. "It's from the hospital," he said, hanging up. "They just found something in Rachel's old laboratory. One last recording, made on the night on her last night." The silence that followed was broken by Daisy, who suddenly pointed to the window. "Look, the water is shining!" Everyone ran to the windows. In the mansion's garden, where the rain had formed small puddles, an inexplicable phenomenon was happening. The water reflected a bluish light, even without any apparent source of illumination. "The blue hour," whispered Grandma Antoinette. "It's happening again, just like on the night Rachel was born." And then, as if responding to a silent call, the flash drive found in the doll began to emit a soft beep. On the computer screen, a file opened automatically, a video dated from Rachel's last night, with a simple but impactful title, "For When the Water Sings Again." The video file opened on the computer screen, revealing Rachel's face in her last recording. Unlike the other recordings, this one had been made at the spring itself, the bluish light of the water reflecting on her face in an almost supernatural way. The date showed exactly 20 years ago, on the night that everything changed. "If you are seeing this recording," began Rachel, her voice calm despite the situation she faced, "it means that the moment I predicted has finally arrived. The water showed me this day in dreams, when all the families would reunite again, when the truth could no longer be contained." Alice sobbed quietly upon seeing her daughter, so vivid and present on that screen. Grandma Antoinette held her hand tightly, offering the silent support that only decades of friendship allow. "What I discovered tonight," continued Rachel, "is greater than any of us imagined. The water is not just a healing agent, it is a link between past and present, between the people who were chosen to protect it. That's why the children dream, that's why Julian feels its presence even from a distance." In the room, Julian straightened up in his wheelchair, his eyes fixed on the screen. Lily approached him, holding his hand instinctively. "Douglas Montenegro discovered part of the truth," continued Rachel, consulting her notes. "He knows that the water can be used for healing, but he doesn't understand that the process is much more complex than simple chemistry. A complete circle is needed, the 5 families, each contributing their unique gift." She picked up an old notebook, showing pages of detailed notes. "The Souzas have the gift of healing in their hands. They always have, since Benedita, My grandmother. The Montgomerys have the ability to protect and provide, as Vincent did by creating the trust fund. The Cardosos bring the scientific knowledge, initiated by Clara, and that now lives in Julian. And what about the Fishers? Asked Ted in a low voice, almost to himself. As if responding to his question, Rachel continued, The Fishers are the guardians of the earth, the only ones able to feel the changes in the water, to know when it is ready for treatment. Augustus Fisher was not just a caretaker, he was a natural censor, as his son Ted and his granddaughters are now. Bernice looked at her daughters with new eyes, finally understanding why Daisy and Lily always seemed to know things that no one else perceived. And the Albrights, continued Rachel, bring legal protection, the ability to defend the gift of water within the system. That's why Vincent insisted on including them in the council, even knowing the risks. Dana Albright lowered her head, the weight of her family's responsibility finally making sense. But tonight, Rachel's voice became more urgent. I discovered something that changes everything. The water doesn't act only on the body, it acts on the soul. Each person treated here leaves an energetic mark, a memory that adds to the healing power. That's why the treatment only works when done with true love. She approached the camera, her eyes shining with intensity. And there's more. I discovered that there is a natural cycle, a moment when the water reaches its maximum potential. The ancients called it the blue hour. It happens only a few times per decade when the conditions are perfect. Grandma Antoinette nodded slowly. Like now, she murmured, looking at the shining puddles in the garden. If you're seeing this, Mom, continued Rachel, tears beginning to run down her face, I want you to know that everything I did was out of love. Love for science, love for humanity, but mainly love for you, who taught me that the true power of healing comes from the heart. She picked up another notebook, newer. Here is the complete treatment process, not just the chemical part, but also the energetic component. Each family has its role, each person their function, and most importantly, I found a way to make the treatment accessible to everyone, not just the rich. At that moment, the recording showed Rachel storing something in a cavity in the stone wall near the spring. The original documents are here, protected, but they can only be recovered when the 5 families are reunited in harmony. When the water cycle is at the right moment. She looked directly at the camera one last time. Julian, I know you will watch this one day. Your mother Clara and I discovered that your condition is not a disease. It's an adaptation. You are more sensitive to the water than any of us. That's why you suffer so much. That's why you feel everything so intensely. But that's also why you will be fundamental in the healing process of others. The boy let out a choked sob, years of doubts finally finding answers. And as for the little ones, Rachel smiled softly, Lily and Daisy, who haven't even been born yet, but I already see in my dreams, you are the next generation of guardians. The water is already singing for you, already preparing to pass on its gift. The 2 girls exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. The moment is coming, warned Rachel, her expression becoming serious. Douglas and his men have discovered about this recording. They are coming, but it doesn't matter. What needed to be preserved is safe. She began to pack her things hastily, but stopped for one last message. Remember, true healing only happens when there is true love. And true love. The recording cut off abruptly, leaving the room in silence. But before anyone could speak, Daisy pointed to the window again. Look, she exclaimed, the lights are dancing. Indeed, the bluish light in the puddles had begun to pulse in a gentle rhythm, as if responding to a music that only the children could hear. It's the calling, said Grandma Antoinette, rising with renewed energy. The blue hour is reaching its peak. We need to go to the spring now. But how? Asked Quincy. The site is blocked. There are security guards. Not anymore, interrupted Dana, picking up her cell phone. I just received confirmation the injunction I requested was approved. The land is officially under judicial protection. George was already standing, grabbing his keys. I'll arrange transportation for everyone. It won't be necessary. Grandma Antoinette smiled mysteriously. Look out the window. In the mansion's garden, dozens of people had gathered, old residents of Harmony Glens, all somehow connected to the 5 families. Each held a blue candle, forming an illuminated path towards the ancient spring. The circle, murmured Alice, understanding. It's completing itself naturally. As Rachel predicted, completed Grandma Antoinette. Now, we just need to follow the water. It will show us the way. As the group prepared to leave, Lily took her doll, the same one that had kept Rachel's secrets for so long. Inside it, she found a last note written with Rachel's unmistakable handwriting. For when the circle is complete again, the water that heals is the same that connects. The love that saves is the same that protects. And the greatest miracle is not in the spring, but in the hearts of those who guard it. The girl put the note in her pocket and took Julian's hand as the group began their journey towards the spring, following the path of blue lights towards the moment that Rachel had predicted 20 years before, when past and present would meet, when secrets would give way to truth, and when the true power of healing would finally be revealed. The path to the spring was illuminated by hundreds of blue candles, creating a corridor of light that snaked through the streets of Harmony. Glens. The group moved forward slowly, Julian in his wheelchair pushed by George, Grandma Antoinette supported by Alice, the 3 sisters together with their parents, and all the others following in a silent procession that attracted curious looks from the windows. Look, whispered Lily, pointing to the sky. Above them, the clouds had opened in a perfect circle, revealing a sky of a deep and unusual blue, even for that time of night. The celestial portal, explained Grandma Antoinette. It only happens during the blue hour, when the water is at its most powerful. As they approached the land of the spring, everyone could see the transformation that the site had undergone. The old trailer where the girls lived was partially demolished, revealing an older structure underneath, stone walls that glowed with a luminescence of their own. The original construction, said Arnold Albright, his voice filled with recognition. It was here all along, hidden under layers of history. Dana Albright, who was walking next to her father, held firmly a folder with the legal documents that formalized the protection of the site. Her husband, Oliver, had chosen to remain at the police station, collaborating with the investigations into Douglas Montenegro. As they approached, a soft sound began to make itself present, like a musical vibrating through the ground. Daisy, who was in Bernice's lap, straightened up suddenly. "It's the music!" she exclaimed. "The same one from my dream!" Julian also reacted to the sound, his breathing becoming deeper, his hands gripping the arms of the wheelchair. "I can feel it," he murmured. It's like the water is calling." When they finally reached the entrance of the old building, they found something surprising. The stone door, which everyone expected to find locked, was ajar. A bluish light emanated from the interior, pulsing in the same rhythm as the musical. "The 5 families," said Grandma Antoinette, her voice firm despite the emotion. "Each must take their place." She guided the group inside, where they found a circular room with 5 niches carved in stone, each marked with an ancient symbol. In the center, a natural well shone with that same supernatural blue light. "The Sousas here," indicated the elderly woman, guiding Alice to the niche marked with the symbol of healing, a spiral that resembled the palm of a hand. "The Montgomerys there." She pointed to the symbol of the protective shield where George positioned himself. One by one, everyone found their places. The Cardosos, Julian and his father, in the niche marked with the symbol of knowledge. The Fishers, Ted, Bernice, and the girls in the space marked with the symbol of the Earth, and the Albrights, Dana and Arnold, in the niche that showed the balance of justice. As soon as everyone positioned themselves, the musical hum increased, and the light from the water began to pulse more intensely. Grandma Antoinette walked to the center, next to the well, taking out an old jar from her bag. "This is the last sample of the water treated by Rachel," she explained. "I kept it for all these years, waiting for this moment." She raised the jar, and the blue light seemed to respond, intensifying. The drops inside the glass began to shine like little liquid stars. "Now," continued the elderly woman, "each family must offer their gift, not by obligation, but by true love." Alice was the first. Approaching the well, she extended her hands over the water, and everyone could see a soft light emanate from her. Palms, the gift of healing from the Sousas, manifesting visibly for the first time. George followed, offering not only his physical and financial protection, but his promise to keep the site accessible to all who needed it. The blue glow responded, forming something like a luminous shield over the water. Julian, still in his wheelchair, was taken to the edge of the well by his father. When he reached out over the water, something extraordinary happened. His legs, normally inert, trembled visibly. "Clara's notes," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "All the scientific knowledge that she and Rachel developed, it's here." He took a flash drive from his pocket, letting it float over the shining water. The Fisher family approached united. Ted, Bernice, and the three girls. Daisy, still in her mother's lap, reached her little hand over the well, and the musical hum increased, as if responding to her touch. "The earth recognizes its guardians," murmured Grandma Antoinette. Finally, the Albrights approached. Dana placed in the water the documents that would legally protect the site, while Armando offered something more personal. An old key that everyone realized must open the cavity where Rachel had hidden her last documents. When the 5 families completed their offerings, the blue light intensified until it was almost blinding. The musical hum grew, transforming into a clear and crystalline melody that seemed to come from all directions. "It's time," said Grandma Antoinette, uncapping the jar with Rachel's last sample. But before she could pour the contents into the water, Lily took a step forward, holding her doll, the same one that had kept the secrets for so long. "Wait," she asked. "The pretty lady from the dream said something is missing." Everyone looked at the girl, who opened a secret compartment in the doll that no one had noticed before. From inside, she removed a small blue crystal. "Rachel showed me in the dream," explained Daisy, her childish voice carrying an ancient wisdom. "It's the heart of the water." Grandma Antoinette smiled, tears running down her wrinkled face. "The catalyst," she whispered. "Clara created it, Rachel perfected it, and the children guarded it without even knowing." With infinite care, Lily dropped the crystal into the water. At the same time that Grandma Antoinette poured the contents of the jar, the effect was immediate. The blue light exploded in a pillar that rose to the sky, piercing through the opening in the clouds. And then, in the middle of that supernatural light, an image formed. Rachel's face, smiling serenely, as if she could finally rest in peace. "The circle is complete," her voice echoed softly. "Love has overcome fear. Truth has overcome lies. And the water can now do what it always should, heal everyone, without distinction." The image dissipated gently, but something had changed. Julian, still sitting in his wheelchair, felt an intense tingling in his legs. Daisy, who had arrived, though still weak from surgery, radiated a renewed energy, and in all those present, a feeling of peace and completeness settled in. Grandma Antoinette looked at the sky through the opening in the clouds, where the first lights of the morning were beginning to appear. "The day is dawning," she said, but tonight marked the true restart. At that moment, as the blue light began to stabilize into a soft and constant glow, everyone understood that a new phase was beginning, not only for the 5 families, but for all of Harmony Glens. But there was still one last revelation to come. On the wall of the cave, exposed by the blue light, an ancient inscription began to shine. Words that Rachel had engraved in the stone on her last night. Words that would forever change everyone's understanding of the true power of the spring. The inscription on the cave wall shone with a light of its own. Rachel's words engraved not only on the stone, but also in the hearts of all those present. The true miracle is not in the water, but in the love that protects it. Healing does not come from the source, but from the hands that offer it with compassion. Power is not in the secret, but in the union of the families who guard it. 6 months had passed since that extraordinary night. The old stone building had been transformed into a treatment center, exactly as Rachel and Vincent had dreamed. The site, now known as Clear Water Institute, was administered by a council formed by the 5 families, each contributing their unique gift. On a sunny spring morning, Julian crossed the Institute's garden supported by a cane. His legs, once paralyzed, were now responding more and more to the treatment developed by his mother and perfected by Rachel. He smiled upon seeing Lily and Daisy playing among the flowers that Alice cultivated, especially for the medicinal preparations. "Uncle Julian!" shouted Daisy, running to hug him. At 5 years old, she was completely recovered from surgery, and her smile illuminated the environment as much as the blue light of the spring. "Easy, little one," warned Bernice, who was supervising the daughters while organizing the patient files. She now worked as the Institute's administrative coordinator, using her experience to ensure that everyone who needed it had access to treatment. Ted, who had recently returned from his stay in rehab, helped with the maintenance of the garden. The work with the earth and the constant contact with the healing energy of the water kept him balanced, free from the addiction that had tormented him for so long. "The new group of patients has arrived," announced Michelle, now a 15-year-old teenager, who dedicated her afternoons to helping at the Institute. Her relationship with Julian had transformed into a deep friendship based on mutual understanding and the shared desire to help others. George, who had just arrived from a meeting with social investors, smiled upon seeing the movement in the garden. The businessman had completely transformed his life, dedicating a large part of his resources to ensure that the Institute remained accessible to all. "We have news," he said, approaching the group. Agent Carter managed to track down the last investors linked to Douglas Montenegro. All diverted funds will be redirected to research and treatment. Dana Albright, who was arriving for her weekly supervision visit, added, "And most importantly, we obtained international recognition of the treatment method. Rachel's and Clara's notes will finally be published in a respected scientific journal." Arnold Albright, who now spent his days in the Institute's library, cataloging and studying the old documents related to the spring, raised his eyes from his papers. "Vincent would be proud," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "They all would be." At that moment, Grandma Antoinette, who remained active despite her 92 years, called everyone to the main hall. It was time for the weekly collective treatment ceremony, when the 5 families gathered to enhance the healing power of the water. "Before we begin," said the elderly woman, "I have something to show you." She opened an old book, revealing a photograph that no one had seen before. In it, a group of children smiled in front of the original construction. Rachel, Clara, Vincent, all still small, surrounded by a bluish light that the photographer at the time must have considered a camera defect. "This photo was taken exactly 60 years ago," explained Grandma Antoinette. "It was another blue hour, another moment of alignment. And look." She turned the photo over, showing an inscription on the back with Rachel's childish handwriting. "When the circle closes again, other children will come, and the water will sing for them as it sings for us today." Lily, who watched the photo with curiosity, suddenly pointed to a detail that no one had noticed. In the corner of the image, almost imperceptible, there was a doll identical to the one that had kept Rachel's secrets for so many years. "The doll always knew," she said, with that peculiar wisdom that so impressed everyone. She kept the secrets until she found the right people to reveal them. Alice, who now directed the Institute's treatment department, hugged her old mentor. To think that it all started with a scared girl knocking on a businessman's door on a rainy night. "No," corrected Grandma Antoinette softly. "It all started long before, with a group of people who chose to protect something precious, not for power or money, but for true love." The soft sound of the water began to make itself present, that music that now everyone knew so well. It was time for the collective treatment, and the families took their places around the central well. Julian, supported by his cane, positioned himself in the space intended for the Cardosos. His legs, stronger every day, allowed him to stand during the entire ceremony. Beside him, Dennis watched his son with pride, not for his physical progress, but for the extraordinary person he had become. Ted and Bernice, with their 3 daughters, occupied the space of the fishers. Michelle, who before kept emotional distance from her mother, now held her hand tightly. Daisy, in the center of the group, began to hum softly, her childish voice harmonizing perfectly with the music of the water. George represented the Montgomerys, his commitment to the protection of the site stronger than ever. Beside him, a photo of his father, Vincent, smiled serenely from a frame on the wall. The Albrights, Dana and Arnold, occupied their space, with the dignity of those who had finally found the true meaning of justice and redemption. And in the center of it all, Alice and Grandma Antoinette represented the Sousas, their hands united over the shining water, channeling the gift of healing that had always been their true inheritance. The blue light began to pulse, stronger with each beat, filling the environment with its healing energy. And on the wall, Rachel's inscription shone one last time, her words now truer than ever. "The greatest miracle is not in the water, but in the hearts that it unites. True healing does not come from the source, but from the love that flows through it. And the strongest power is not in the secret, but in the courage to share it." Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky with tones of pink and gold. But inside the Clearwater Institute, a different light shone, the light of hope, of love and of healing, a legacy that would continue flowing through the generations, as eternal and powerful as the very spring that originated it. And so, as the night fell softly over Harmony Glens, the song of the water echoed through the corridors of the Institute, carrying with it the promise that some miracles, the true miracles, happen not through supernatural powers, but through the purest love and the most sincere union between people. The story of the spring and the 5 families would continue to be told for many generations, not as a legend or a secret, but as a testament to the transformative power of love, truth, and the courage to do the right thing no matter the cost. And somewhere, Rachel smiled, knowing that her sacrifice had not been in vain. The circle was complete, the water sang again, and love, the true power behind all healing, flowed freely, as it always should have been.